came to architecture, back in the day, for some of us who were born before independence, back in the day, we may not have had very good career guidance. But then I was quite good with the sciences, and at the same time, I was good at fine art. So, there was a debate within me, what do I do, engineering or architecture? So I decided on architecture because I would combine both the science and also my art. That's how I got into architecture. How about you, Davy?
Well, it was very interesting for me because I was very lucky to have been guided, actually. I had an uncle, the late Kiki Nyabongo. He was the chairman of the Town and Country Planning Board. And he was very exposed. So he used to visit us very regularly, and even while we were still in primary school settings. And I used to like doodling. I was kind of going in my own corner sometimes, not, So he took an interest in all of us, and actually all of us developed different career. I think essentially from him retrospectively, because when I went to school, I was already thinking architecture, which nobody was thinking about in secondary school. And I was already seeing some very interesting structures. There had been an earthquake, as I mentioned at the beginning, and some new form had come out with steel structures. The chapel at Nankya School, which is at the center, is done like in steel structure. And it was new, from the brick and mortar and so on, which we had got accustomed to. So architecture became even more interesting and vivid for me. So I carried on. Of course, luckily I was also balanced sciences and arts. So I carried on arts right through A levels. Okay. And Makerere, that time when I was ready, didn't have architecture. That was 1970, late 70s, during the Ghanaian time. Okay. 77, 8, the community had broken down. So I struggled. Eventually I went to the Indian Institute of Technology. And there I found engineering, 18 different engineering disciplines compared to the 3 at Nakasura, at Makerere. And then I found, of course, architecture, naval architecture, aeronautical engineering, and the real civil architecture. So it was exciting for me.
Yeah, okay. Dolores, how did you get it there?
My story is not different from yours. But then what encouraged me even more is at school there were a lot of new buildings going up. And I could see someone looking at a piece of paper, flat, and then coming out with something in 3 dimensions. And I wondered, how does he read a small piece of paper and then come up with a huge building? So I was intrigued, and I said, I must find out. I must study architecture to see exactly how the two construction and designing, were interacting. But the background was science and fine art.
That's right.
Very strong.
I
hadn't heard of any women taking up architecture. It was mostly men, and even in Uganda there were very few Ugandans becoming architects. The Indians, and I think they were draftsmen, and some European firms that were doing most of the architecture here. And at that time, the only school in East Africa was Nairobi. So I went to Nairobi University to do my architecture. My worry was the 5 years. It was 5 years.
Forever.
It was forever. And then people come back with stories like, nobody does architecture in 5 years.
Yeah.
It's 7, 10, some never even finish.
Sure.
Unlike other courses where, because architecture, like an exam, is not an answer. Like say 1 + 1 is 2. Architecture is so subjective. So if someone doesn't like your design, you failed. And if someone likes your design, your lecturer or your supervisor, then you have a good chance of coming through. So it is a very challenging course in that there are no right answers. You cannot say, this is the thing to do. Any problem, there might be 10, 15, solutions. And it depends on who is looking at it, to appreciate what you've done, or to say, go back to the drawing board. So that I managed, I pulled through, and I'm here now.
Me too. I like you, I went to the University of Nairobi, and that time we still had the inter-university exchange program under the East African community. So there's courses, in particular universities. Architecture was in Nairobi University, medicine was in Makerere, I think law was in Dar es Salaam, vet was in Kabete in Nairobi. So I got the chance and go to Nairobi. And the course, like you say, was not easy. It involved very long hours, and many people in first year did not really appreciate and understand what the course was all about. And out of a class of 60 that started in first year, I think by the end of first year, the class had gone to half. Others had run away to engineering. And it was very, very difficult. The failure rate in Nairobi was quite a really big challenge. And I remember the strikes.
Yes.
And I remember having been led when we were in first year, put on our gowns. It was started with architecture because the failure rate was just crazy in Nairobi University. So, but we managed to pull through. And after my graduation, I worked for 2 years in Nairobi. And I was supposed to go. I got a placement to go to MIT to do a master's. So that's how I left Nairobi University to come back to Uganda.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah. Because actually, when you talk about the failure rate, it was the same with my school, my college. We started, I remember, a dozen of us, because actually the ratio of lecturers and professors to students was really had to be very close watch and supervision. So they didn't admit more than 15 in the batch.
Right.
Architects, students. But when we wound up, we were just half of the number at
That's true.
And we were lucky to pull through. And for me, it was a very interesting experience because we had international students. In my batch, we had students from Singapore, from Malaysia, from India, different parts of India. It's a subcontinent with different experiences. I was the only African, I think, on that campus for a long time.
Wow.
I was joined by Liberia and very briefly we left also. So I was kind of representing Africa.
Yeah.
A few Tanzanians came, I think, to do some short courses in planning and left. So I had a very interesting experience actually touring and appreciating architecture, having gone through the hurdle of course, like I said, I was actually prepared for architecture myself. So we had a very good experience in terms of the different architectural styles and experience beyond what we left behind here in Uganda and East Africa. Because there the architecture goes a long way. And the course was organized in a way that there would always be a long trip every year for the second, third, and fourth years to tour the different areas of the country and different styles of architecture. So we could go, say, to areas where it's more modern, where it has maybe Buddhist or Hindu influence, where it has Taj Mahals and the like, which have more Muslim influence, and kind of go with a batch of other students, senior and junior, usually second, third, and fourth years. The final years were out and so there was a lot of interaction. by way of different levels of training at that time, and also multicultural, if you want to say, from different backgrounds. I found it very, very interesting.
Can we hear from our colleague, architect Lilian Namuganyi, on her perspectives from the academic point of view?
My experience was, I think, unique because unlike my colleagues who went to Nairobi, I went to London for my education. I went to the Architectural Association School of Architecture in London. I have always been in a creative environment, and I was lucky to encounter people who encouraged me in my journey. For example, before I left, I met architect Nur Kadu, the late, and architect Kizito Apollonius. Those people encouraged me, as well as my art teachers, my parents. So much as there were not many architects in Uganda, these people opened the doors for me. When I left Uganda, it was not a very developed place. There were few modern buildings apart from those that had been built by the early Europeans. Also a few by the early architects, again like Nur Kadu, architect Sentogo. But on the whole, Uganda was not very developed. So I had a culture shock. I was thrown into this ultra-modern world with ultra-modern students who knew how to do everything, who knew about photography development, who had worked in the workshop. And overnight, I was required to do these things. So it was a bit of a culture shock. I had to work extra hard. When other people were on holiday, I was working. The typical architecture student's experience, only that mine was, I can safely say mine was exaggerated, was more because I had to catch up with these people who were well ahead of me in terms of facilities. I'd never seen a computer. I'd never worked with an electronic typewriter. It was kind of a culture shock, so I had to catch up. But I enjoyed my student days, especially exposure to culture, exposure to museums, exposure to new thought. It was like coming from a very homogeneous landscape and going into a United Nations of the world. Many people from different cultures, Europeans, people from Asia. And that added a lot to my experience as an architect.